Hi guys, welcome to today's episode of the Big Cyber Series, where we are talking all things operational resilience as outlined by the Digital Operations Resilience Act, or DORA, and the Financial Services and Market Act, or FSMA. So we'll do a quick round of introductions. Might start with you.
Thank you very much. I'm Ed Rowley from Proofpoint. I'm a Channel Sales Engineering Director there.
Fantastic, lovely to have you.
Hi there, Barrett Mystery, Field CTO from Trend Micro.
Thank you.
Yeah, Katan Pine. I'm a pre-sales engineer at Thales.
Lovely.
And I'm Charles Adriansons. I'm a financial services industry advisor at Splunk.
Exciting stuff. A lovely mix. And I am Aoibhin Hamill. I'm a cybersecurity sales engineer at Softcat. So, kicking us off, all things operational resilience. I'll probably start with you, Charles. How have financial organizations responded to the requirements that have been laid out for them in legislations such as DORA?
Well, that's quite a big area,
Huge.
first of all. So I'll do my best to summarise. Most importantly, there was no option whether or not to respond or not.
Mm-hmm.
Legislation in both the EU and the UK requires every financial services organisation to be compliant. Regulators globally are now starting to follow suit, with the UK and the EU very much the focal point for them to build their own requirements. And the rationale for doing this was really to ensure the stability of the financial services industry. The world has changed over the last 10 years or so, and there are more potential issues that threaten the industry's resilience than ever before.
Mm-hmm.
And that really caused the regulators to act. There are more cyber threats than ever, but also there's external events that threaten the ability of financial services organisations to deliver products and services to end customers, which after all is what they're all about.
Mm-hmm.
Politically, we're in a challenging environment at the moment, and that directly impacts the providers. So against all these potential threats, the ability to maintain what normal business operations is becoming more challenging. And that's the rationale for the regulators introducing these requirements.
Absolutely. And so tell me, how does compliance contribute to overall operational resilience for these organizations?
It focuses the mind.
Mm-hmm.
The requirements are outlined at quite a high level, and it's up to the organizations themselves to interpret what to do and then work with regulators to make sure that they're doing the right things. We're at the point now where DORA has just gone live in January. They've got through the phase of making sure they can do what they need to do to be compliant. And some organizations are now starting to look beyond the requirements of regulation. Some organizations are starting to look ahead. Some are still perhaps struggling with the requirements of what they needed to do for January. So there's different levels of maturity. But the key thing is, and the most important outcome, I think, of the regulation has been it's focused everyone to think about what they're doing to remain resilient, and put in place people, processes and reporting to get themselves up to almost a minimum standard. And that's going to be the starting point for the evolution of strategies moving forward.
You mentioned compliance, and I think the compliance focusing the mind, but non-compliance and the stick associated with that is definitely part of that focus, I think, and forcing companies to focus, forcing companies to understand the return on security investment, and all of a sudden that changes their investment, changes what they're going to spend their money on, because they understand that the impact of not being compliant is significant.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, the cost of not being resilient, it could be quite significant now. So, for example, there is the potential penalties from non-compliance from the regulator, which could be significant. Not saying they will be, but they could be significant, which is obviously the stick.
Kitty's got claws.
Yeah, well, exactly. But also, you think about the implications on end customers. So the cost of downtime for any financial services organisation is significant. We've done research that suggests it could be, on average, about $200 million a year if services are not available. And that's a significant cost over and above the potential for regulatory fines. And then when you think about the knock-on effect in terms of what customers experience, it increased the chances of your customers going elsewhere because there are so many alternatives out there at the moment. So actually, yes, resilience is important because the potential penalties, but actually it's a lot bigger than that.
Absolutely. And I suppose that kind of does really nicely snowball me into the next question. What benefits could a financial organization expect to see from being operationally resilient?
In terms of benefits, the ones outlined earlier, the main ones really from a financial perspective, but actually you could argue an organization that isn't resilient will struggle in the longer term to remain competitive. If you think about what financial services intrinsically is, it's your ability to move money around the financial services system. And for you and I, just coming up to payday right now, if I don't get paid and I can't pay my bills, then that's going to cause me personally a big problem and would cause me to potentially move to another organization.
Absolutely.
And that's part of resilience. It's a whole lot more than that as well, but at a very fundamental level, financial services organizations serve their customers.
Absolutely. So it might be fair to say that one benefit to being operationally resilient is just everyone gets a better night's sleep. No one's that worried. Their money is safe.
For anybody related to technology and compliance and cyber is the key criteria.
So leading on from that, what do you see financial organizations doing to remain and stay operationally resilient in the coming 5 years and keeping their security posture mature and strong?
I think resilience from a timing perspective has no bounds, and it will become more important as a desired business outcome for every financial services organization. Some people think resilience can be put into a tick box, but it can't really. You will mature your resilience posture over time. So let's think about what the UK regulations ask you to do, which is have visibility on your important business services, monitor them, and make sure that you remain within impact tolerances. To do that, you have to have visibility of the technology that supports that business service, and you have to have the data that allows you to say, actually, is that service performance at any given time? And if it isn't, how do I resolve any issues that are taking place? That's a significant undertaking. And some organizations have managed to achieve that for some of their business services. But actually, to achieve that for all your business services, and if you want to be truly resilient for your entire organization, it is really challenging. And for that reason, that 5-year time frame, I don't think really applies anymore. I think organizations need to understand what they want to achieve to be resilient. It might be different for every single organization, and then slowly work towards it, taking it step by step. And the end goal might be an organization where actually nothing impacts the performance of critical services, because we've seen everything before, and there's automation orchestration being put in place, automated healing, probably including some form of AI and ML, and we have to include AI in a conversation somewhere because it's trendy.
There's the fine.
Yeah, the first one to say it.
But in reality, it's all about just in a way doing your job.
Yeah,
it's an ongoing program, right? It's not I'm going to do it this year, get a tick box done, and I'm done. But no, it's like GDPR. It's an ongoing program of maturity and improvement. Whether you actually get there or not isn't the question. I don't think you ever will get there.
No,
it's a question of evolving your program as you mature as an organization. As we see some of these challenger banks coming in, for example, compared to the traditional banks that you've got, and see the kind of differences in operational models that they have. It's so far different, and the maturity is so different. The question is, how do you stabilize that and kind of equate that and make a level playing field for the consumer? Because that's what it comes down to. It's consumer saying, I want choice, and I want to know that I'm buying I'm taking a service from an organization, and it's going to be the same no matter what.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing is that the threat environment never stays still either. So you can be resilient, let's say, in the current environment, but then as soon as you're resilient, something else comes along that threatens you. So having the systems, processes, and people in place to respond to anything is going to become increasingly important as we move forward.
Absolutely. Makes a lot of sense. So, Ed, out of curiosity, what do you think are some misconceptions about operational resiliency and you think they might need to be addressed?
The first one, and probably the biggest, is there's frequently an assumption that it's an IT problem. It's not an IT problem. It is a business problem, and it needs to be owned at the senior level, at the most senior level. If your company's got a board, someone on the board needs to be responsible for that. And that is what I love about the legislation that's coming into place. It really identifies that. Other misconceptions that it can be solved with products. Okay, it cannot be solved by just buying a product. Bharat mentioned a moment ago, you've got to have a program.
Yeah.
You need a program. You need to understand what your goals are, have steps to reach those goals. Yes, products and services will help you achieve those goals. But they will not solve it on their own. The third, I would argue, is about the misconception about data. People think it's just about having a data backup. It's not. So it could even go as far as having a table to work from. But if all of your employees' laptops can't log on, if your Active Directory has been compromised and no one has access to anything, the data is useless anyway. If the data's been wiped, hopefully you've got a backup. But if no one can access it or it's been compromised and corrupted, where do you go? So it's not simple. It needs ownership and it needs a plan.
Absolutely. And it needs buy-in from everyone in the organization as well.
100%. Yeah, great point.
And so how do you see the role of human factors coming into play with the context of operational resilience? Again,
Human factor is key. It's people who are being targeted by criminals. 90+% of compromises coming into an organization are based on an individual reacting or responding to something. But it's also people who are interacting with data. It's people who are losing data. So key elements of the legislation are pointing at you must train your people. They are part of your resilience. They're a key part of your resilience. And again, it's not just products, it's not just firewalls, it's not just hardware that solves resilience. It's people, it's the whole organization, but it has to start with people.
Absolutely. Because something I often said when working with clients is like, you're only as strong as your weakest link.
Absolutely.
That's the one who's going to click the link and put their details in and, all the silly things.
And that changes. I don't know, I'm old enough to remember the notion of a Friday car, a Friday afternoon car. The Friday afternoon car would break down quickly and you think, it's been built on a Friday. People are tired, they don't really care anymore. The weekend's on the horizon. We don't know where we are in an emotional state. So you might be the best or the most well-trained person in the organization. You might never have had a problem, but all of a sudden you get some bad news. You're tired. Something has happened that's distracting you. You react incorrectly and you're the source of the problem. So the weakest link is a changeable.
That's a really good point. I actually hadn't considered the emotional state aspect,
Somebody goes postal.
Yeah.
I'm going to give this data away.
Absolutely.
Yeah. As we saw from the case with the British Museum last week, where an employee who had been exited from the organisation managed to wander back in and start to wipe files. So it took the British Museum down for a few days.
Wow.
So we have real life examples of this happening week in, week out.
Yeah, scary stuff. Important to keep these people trained.
And happy.
And happy. Yeah,
yes.
That's a good point.
Happy's
Keep the
key.
staff happy.
Happy's good.
Mm.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So, Catan. Operational resilience, as outlined in FSMA and DORA, it states that there's a need for comprehensive compliance management. How do they start this journey?
First of all, I want to make the point that DORA is not something new. Operational resilience existed before. What the problem was that people didn't understand and it wasn't prescriptive enough. So that's been the issue. And DORA has simply pulled them together and created a recipe. So now we've got a great 5-course meal, which are the 5 pillars of DORA, and basically saying, you must do this. You must at least have this underway. People get bogged down in the complexity. So when you look at DORA and all these operational resilience compliance requirements, they're pragmatic. They're not trying to tie you up in red tape. They're not trying to bog you down. They're trying to make sure, as you've said, that you have begun the journey. You have begun to understand what are the requirements to protect your organization, to keep it secure, to keep it operational, to make sure you deliver the services and you meet your business requirements. If you're dealing with your third party, do you know the risks they present to you?
Codifying supply chain and third-party supply chain security is a great part of this legislation. I think it's been an oversight for a long time. People are becoming increasingly aware, but having that in this legislation is a great step forward. 100% agree with what you're saying there.
Absolutely. It can't be someone else's responsibility. You have
No.
to,
No.
I mean, that's your brand's name associated with another brand's name. You have to make sure. Catan, tell me, how vital is automation in the journey of operational resilience?
Automation is vitally important. So we said about constant vigilance, but again, that constant vigilance is reporting to your SIEM system. How do you know when something's been compromised? if there is not automation in place to raise an alert. So that whole incident management reporting process, if you can automate it, it takes away a headache. All you're doing is you're then making sure what happened, what caused it to happen, what measures did we put in place to stop it happening again. And they're some of the vital things that DORA and NIST2 and PRA and FSMA are wanting you to have in place. So automation, big part.
Just like to kind of add on the back of that, I think the other important thing that automation brings is consistency.
Yes.
So you've got a set amount of artifacts that are going to come out each time. By automating it, consistency is first thing. Second thing is being able to do it at scale. If you think about most organizations now, they're in a hybrid world where they've got on-premise, got cloud, and multiple third parties. The thing is you want to be able to scale that out. Doing it manually just doesn't work. And to have automation tools in play just accelerates that process.
It's a moving feast.
Yeah,
You've got to keep
it's the only
track
way
of
to do it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Perish the thought, but AI helps a lot there as well. Big time.
Yes.
Damn, second fine.
And yeah, I mean, I guess just to add to that, the whole concept of continuous monitoring, this is not something that is done and finished and complete. At all times, you need to know how your critical services are performing, which is a key part of the requirements. And the threats to them performing in the way you want are evolving. So your monitoring needs to be robust enough to be able to adapt to literally anything that is thrown at you from the internal, external, or cyber environments. And increasingly, there are more threats and they're coming from more places. So the monitoring needs to be able to pick up anything that might disrupt your performance of your services.
And actually to add, I mean, on things, something that I often find come up is monitoring's all well and good, but as well, if you can map to something like the C10 framework, continuous threat exposure management, ensuring that you're actually testing it, understanding, and as you said, Catan, it's only as good as the last time something was actioned, a scan was done, a test was ran. So ensuring that not only are you continuously monitoring, but also continuously testing to the best of your ability to make sure that they're as robust as they can be.
And learning from that as well, not
key point, not
getting
just testing.
the outputs.
Yeah.
You're actually refining your systems and processes to take account of things you've already seen, so that frees up other people's time to protect against things that you haven't seen yet that will automatically come along.
I've got a great example of that. It's a very simple example.
Yep.
I was visiting a customer once and they took me into their server room. It was a lovely, shiny server room. And then they had this extra secure bit behind this sort of electronically locked door. And they said, yeah, well, it looks great, but once we had a power cut and we hadn't got any universal power supplies in on our servers in there. So they just went down straight away. So we plugged in the universal power supplies, happy. Another power cut. I said, great, let's go and shut everything down gracefully. They'd forgotten that the power cut affected their ability to open the door.
Oh.
This electronic lock just meant that they got to watch through these hardened glass, the countdown as the UPS ran out of power and just failed. So yeah, learn, revisit,
Absolutely.
So Barrett, in the face of all these evolving threats, how can organizations leverage threat intelligence to ensure that they're staying resilient and that they're able to stay on top of these things?
Yeah, really interesting question. So threat intelligence on its own doesn't really make that much odds, right? It's a question of how you collect it, how you process it, and then how you use it. But ultimately, it's about, I would say, getting on the front foot. We're always kind of sitting on the back foot when it comes to cyber. And we see that from some of the studies that have been coming out in the last few years. I think still it's about 240 days plus by the time we've seen an event occur. And in majority of cases, it's an external agency telling you've been compromised. So you can see what the state of play is. What threat intelligence does, and certainly used in the right way, allows you to proactively look in your environment for two things. First of all, knowing what the threat actors' kind of techniques, tools and procedures, or TCPs are, using them and sweeping your environment to see, have I seen some of this? Because what you can then do is one of two things. Either we can see the start of an attack and you can stop it in its progress right there and then before anything significant happens, or you can put in some proactive measures to actually stop that attack from happening in the first place. But the key to it is where you collect that information from. Now, there are open source intelligence sources out there, but more importantly is actually collaboration. So public-private partnerships and collaboration within the industry peers as well. So in financial institutions, for example, if they share what's going on, there's a good chance of it being caught early. I think kind of taking it, one step further from an operational point of view, it allows you to address the vulnerabilities in your organization. We see so many new vulnerabilities coming out every week, every month. Where do you start from? If you know your threat actor, you know what kind of techniques they're going to use, what kind of vulnerabilities they're targeting, you can start to address them in the first instance. And then you can also follow up with a prioritized patching schedule as well. Patching is, again, another huge problem, right? And it's a bigger problem for financial institutions, especially where downtime is just like, no. We have to keep our systems up and running. It's a question of a change control window, testing it. If it doesn't work, back out, and you're still vulnerable. So it's kind of prioritizing those things as well.
Because if you don't mind, a CVSS might kind of detail the severity, but not necessarily the risk to you.
No.
And so you need to be looking at things, and with the use of threat intelligence, keep me honest here, you need to be looking at, like, when was this last exploited? Where was it last exploited? What industry was affected?
Exactly.
That kind of stuff.
Exactly. If you can pinpoint those things, you can then create like what we call an attack path in your organization. And you can start modeling actually what are the choke points I can put in if something was to happen. So this is now switching from reactive to proactive, and then kind of putting those measures in play and automating the tasks of doing it.
Going back to your point with the advanced threat intelligence, for larger organizations as part of DORA, I believe they're required to run testing, to run penetration testings, blue team, red team tests, and having the techniques and understanding of the advanced tools and advanced techniques being used by criminals, by nation state actors or whatever, is essential to running a successful penetration test, I think. So that's another angle, I think, where having that intelligence, understanding that intelligence that we've got, the threat intelligence, is key.
So, Barrett, with the increasing complexity of these legislations, like DORA, FSMA, what kind of approaches can organizations take to streamline their compliance?
Wow, another big one. So actually, this builds on top of what Ed was saying.
Mm-hmm.
So compliance, like cyber, it's not just an IT issue. It's something that goes across a business, and there need to be stakeholders across the business. So compliance has to fit that same kind of mantra, I would say. You need to start incorporating compliance into all the business processes. So we talk about secure by design for product, but this is secure by design within processes and procedures that you follow as well. And it starts from there, because once you can ingrain it into the core foundation of your operation, it then just starts to emanate through all the way. When you do it as an afterthought, like how most industries do it, it's just a bolt-on, and you can see how people will always circumvent. There are always going to be people that say, actually, I'm trying to get my job done, but this is stopping me, and they will always bypass that route. And it's how do you stop that? I think the next thing is leveraging what Ketan was saying. It's about automation as well. How can you take some of those tedious tasks away? Things like data collection, for example, reporting. How do you do the monitoring? Do you get someone, eyes on glass? That can be expensive. Or do you put some kind of system in play that can collect, can do the first stage of analysis and correlation, create a report, and then send the information up? Obviously, now we're getting into the realms of technology adoption as well. And this is where technology can help. But it's those things, I would say, that are going to start. And then the last bit I would say is around the human factors, tying it back all together. It's the training people, making them aware of what's going on, knowing what their responsibility is and the impact of it. If we look at, I think it was last year, there was a financial services organization in Hong Kong that was duped by a deepfake. Because there were no kind of processings in there for kind of reporting back or qualifying or being able to kind of justify, am I right in doing this, or because the language that was used, the tone that was used, the individual was compromised. And, he then went on to kind of do an action which he thought he was being commanded to do by his superiors. But in actual fact, he was being duped into doing something that he shouldn't be doing.
Well, there we go. But I do think as well, like with the automation, I think it's quite interesting with the human factor. It's like we want automation to cover as much as it can. so that we limit any human error possibility. But at the same time, you can't just turn it on and set and forget. Like, you can't just say, oh, that'll do its job. I won't look at that again. So, like, for anyone, where do we think is the right mix of human interaction and automation when it comes to staying resilient and keeping your cybersecurity posture as strong as it can be?
Yeah. So, when you look at, as a human being, if I had to go and correlate events in a SIEM system, I'm going to fail drastically
Yeah.
because I'll get bored within 5 minutes. I'll just look at it and go, okay, I'm going to go get a cup of coffee. But yeah, to add some intelligence to that, so that then, like you say, correlate the event, find the factors behind it, and then say, right, based on the evidence there, that it looks like something significant, and therefore you need to do something. Or do you want me to do something?
Yeah. That's the main thing. Are we looking at playbooks, that kind of thing of, follow the bounce ball. If this happens, do this. Or are we having humans sit there and say, well, I completely understand what the priorities of this organization is, and I'm going to decide that I'll take this action.
It's quite funny. Going back in the day, it's when we were deploying network IDSs, people were like, oh, do you really want to do that sort of thing? But as you build up confidence and you kind of see patterns, you then start saying, actually, we will start doing prevention. We recognize this set pattern. We know it's not going to deviate. And if you can get those kinds of rules sorted out, that will take you a long way. You just need the human oversight for any kind of grey areas. And it's marking those grey areas. And it comes down to, I would say, your risk appetite at that point as well.
And just to add to that as well, so we work in the industry that employ people that we put in charge of millions and billions of pounds worth of infrastructure, and we have no formal qualification. So if you go to a doctor, if you go to a lawyer, they have to prove their tenure. But in the IT industry, I could take on somebody and they'll say, I've got X, Y, Z experience. And obviously I can refer them, I can check their references, but there's nothing to prove how good they are effectively in that. So in context of monitoring something or making sure the infrastructure is resilient, how confident am I in the human being that I've employed?
The Chartered Institute of Information Security Professionals is trying to do a good job on that, but it's still not widely known.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly not widely known enough, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But I think bringing up the human element is really important, because I think most people acknowledge that it needs to be there somewhere.
Yeah.
Not everybody thinks like that. So I have had people say, my dream is to have everything automated with no human intervention. I didn't
Skynet.
I didn't quite know how to react to that. But you're right, because it has to be the right form of human intervention as well, at the right time, by the right people. And that's one of the biggest complexities, actually. Yes, we are trying to automate the stuff that we know about and can be automated, but then still that oversight, human oversight, needs to be in there somehow. And organizationally, that's going to be a big challenge. And it's going to be a challenge at the point at which this is becoming a bigger risk, and a risk that's being monitored higher up the organization than ever before.
Mm-hmm.
Because all of a sudden, we're not just talking about technology risk or cyber risk, we're talking about business risk. So therefore, it's going right up to the CEO sometimes. And that leads to another challenge, which is being able to communicate to people that are not used to consuming technical words or data, that when things go wrong and why they're going wrong, because there's interest from more senior parts of the organisation than ever before. So that creates its own organisational challenges. And I think that's not something that's not straightforward to work out at all. But your compliance stuff is relatively straightforward because there are parameters to that. But actually, the higher you go up the organisation, the more complex it gets.
Okay, guys. So what do we think are the most common challenges that financial organizations face when they're trying to remain compliant with things like DORA, FSMA, and how do these organizations overcome these challenges?
So the biggest challenges we find, it starts with the very simple processes. Don't get bogged down in the detail.
And I'm going to say the opposite.
Go on.
just to be controversial. And I think there's a few things that need to be done. So the best example I've seen of a response to the UK regulations was an organisation mapping out what they want to achieve in relation to monitoring important business services and making sure they remain within impact tolerances, being very clear in what they want to do, then trying it once, failing, being successful, working out what works, before moving on to second and subsequent. So you've almost got a template in methodology that was used. Then make sure that template is replicable. And if you can do that successfully, then roll out consistently across everything that you need to monitor. Now, that is incredibly difficult, but just having that approach, I think, really helped that organization to be successful. And that's the best example. It doesn't always work like that. And some people just say, I'm going to do something, see how I get on, and then pivot from there. And that can be difficult if you haven't got that vision of where you want to be, which is why when I was talking earlier about maturity, it's good to know how far you want to get and how quickly, rather than just saying we're going to do everything and this is where we're going to be. Actually, what's achievable within the timeframes and parameters that we've got, not just in terms of regulatory parameters, but also organizational parameters, because that can often be the biggest hurdle.
100% agree. That's having a security maturity model is key. You know, baby steps and review is so important.
Yeah.
I'd also say one of the biggest challenges for financial institutions, many of them are really old, but there's some that are very new. Adding sand to the gears, for want of a better term. As you put in place security, you will be changing procedures. For some organizations, that is anathema. They don't want their procedures slowing down in any way. Many financial transactions take place over milliseconds. So if you're seen to be slowing that up, or even perceived to be potentially slowing that up, they'll meet barriers. And some people won't buy into what you're trying to achieve, the security that you're trying to implement to make them go faster. They will perceive it as a barrier to success, not a rocket for success. So overcoming that, and again, goes back to that top-down acceptance of risk or top-down promotion of security is really important to overcome that particular barrier.
Absolutely.
They need to be thinking about is really taking a risk-based approach. The rest of the business does it. Why doesn't IT and in particular cyber do that? And it's getting some of those things right, understanding what the exposure looks like, and then putting in mitigating controls. Now, some of them might be technology, some of them might be processes, but that's the other thing, right? Everyone is so fixated on technologies. Technology isn't always the answer. Quite often, a procedural policy will take the risk away.
Absolutely. Like a holistic approach, the whole shebang, anything that could be, whether it's tools, services, partners, having a full view of that.
Absolutely.
At least as a starting point. Yeah, makes sense.
And I found sometimes internally quantification of risk can be quite challenging. So you know what's risky, but how risky is each element of that, and being able to quantify in some way, even if it's not 100% accurate, is very, very helpful, because then it gives you an idea of where your greatest vulnerabilities could be. And that's a challenge.
Yeah.
That's a challenge, because that's never static either.
I was going to also, I suppose leading on from that, with legislations like DORA and FSMA and, as they go on, any of them as they come out, they affect certain industries. So in this instance, the financial sector is what's being looked at. How there are going to be organizations out there who want to improve their operational resilience and, become more resilient. How can they pull from legislations like these without having to comb through documents and finding what is applicable to them?
In my mind, the legislation is there to protect critical infrastructure. Without these particular organizations working, our whole economies across Europe, economies across the world will fail, they'll collapse. Okay. So all the legislation is doing is codifying best practice. That's all it's doing. So all these organizations can just work with any security advisor, people like Softcat, as an example, and go to you for advice on what should I do as a business to make myself more robust? What should I do to make my operational resilience better? I think it's as simple as that.
So if you haven't got the people, if you haven't got the resource, if you haven't got the technology, then buy it in. But
Agreed.
Check the supplier.
Well, absolutely, yeah.
Don't
From a
just buy-
services background myself, I was thinking, make sure that you grill whoever you're talking to make sure that whatever they're offering is going to match what you need. And if it's not, best thing that's going to happen is they're going to say, actually, we can't meet exactly what you're looking for. And then you'll find the person who can. Partnering up is the best idea in my head, but with the right partner. That's the key point.
I was going to say, just from a third-party perspective, so just listening, we went to an event a couple of weeks ago. I was hearing the cloud service providers talking about their offerings and the assurances they're going to give to their financial services customers related specifically to DORA compliance. There sounds as though could be putting in DORA compliant stacks, which they will assure will meet all the requirements of DORA and potentially other regulation over time. If you're not on that stack and they don't know that you're running a critical service on that stack, that is an area that's definitely a grey area in terms of where does the responsibility lie. So to your point, grill people 100% and make sure you know what you're getting and why you're getting it and how it's being delivered to you.
Absolutely.
Because it's going to be more and more important in the future.
Yes.
And a question, do you think a service like that, like a DORA stack, would that be a silver bullet for organizations who don't know what they're doing? Or
Well, it might be perceived as that.
I thought so, yeah. When it comes to incident response and recovery plans and having, built ones and, good ones, a lot of the time it's the IT team trying to get the buy-in from the C-suite. Like, we need you to be at the table. We need you to know what we're talking about, that kind of thing. How can organizations, regardless of whether we're talking IT team or, business stakeholders, how do these organizations ensure that they have these robust incident response plans and recovery plans as well?
Yeah, people see the cyber side as a separate thing and they think that, okay, it's only getting a backup tape out and recovering. Actually, it's a lot more than that. And people think, okay, we could do tabletop exercises and it's always the cost. People see it always as a cost issue. What I've spoken to a couple of organizations and said, have you thought about teaming up with your business continuity team and mapping it in with the business continuity test? Because by law, you have to do that. And this is the same sort of thing. If you think about it, having a cyber disruption, having a business disruption, and you've got to switch and go to a new data center, it's the same thing. There's no difference, right? So why not incorporate, a cyber incident as part of your business continuity testing? And you're testing both angles. You're going beyond just a tabletop exercise. You're actually recovering, all the mechanisms. Your board and everyone, there's a full kind of plan around that. What PR plan do we put in there? What do we say to the press? What do we say to insurance providers? All of that has to go. We've seen, the best of that and we've seen the worst of that. The worst of that happened to UK telco 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if you know what I'm talking about.
We all know.
Yeah.
Yes.
The CISO went up. No, it's the CIO went up. We've had an incident, but I don't know what's going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then you look at a manufacturer I think it's in the Nordics, and they're aluminium manufacturer. They had the same thing. They reverted back to paper-based action and everything. They were doing regular comms with press, media, with the local government agency and everything. And the business ran. And they didn't see any reputational damage on the back of it. Whereas TalkTalk, on the other hand, it's taken them a good while, but they're to get back.
I think one thing that's interesting that I've noticed is sort of some cultural change starting to be prevalent in some of the companies that we're working with. And over the last couple of months, we've had conversations, I don't know if you've had this, but about resilience operating centres.
Yes.
Which is feels to me like a reflection on what the regulation's asking for, but then taking it to a different level that works within your organisation. So you're trying to break down some organisational silos so that you are able to deal with whatever comes your way, bringing together all the teams that, as you were saying, it's not just one team that you have to say, oh, come on, what's going on, guys? It's actually multiple teams to get the best response. And that's the way that organisations are heading, which is really interesting because it's something we haven't heard before. But I think what that in turn does is affect the culture of the organisation so that resilience becomes embedded within the entire organisation rather than just specific teams. And I think that's a good thing and a good long-term thing to make sure organisations can be more resilient long-term. And their needs and requirements can then be debated by the team rather than in individual silos or individual teams within that. And I think that's a positive move forward.
How do we believe legislations like DORA and FSMA are addressing cybersecurity and data protection for financial institutions?
So first of all, know what you have. So we already talked a little bit about this. but I'm going to be very explicit. So take a stock of your infrastructure, know what you have in place, know where it's up to. Is it current? Is it up to date? So it's no longer just maintaining a configuration management database, CMDB. It's prescriptive. You have to know, you have to keep a track of it, all your assets in your organization. And that also includes your data. So one of the problems that a lot of organizations, and I think I've written about this, is they have this thing called dark data. There's a thing of data that we all sit there and it's managed and we have to keep feeding it and powering it and providing more and more. Nobody knows what's in it. Is it business critical? Is it sensitive? So first of all, run some process on it and find out, why are we keeping all that data? It's, tens, hundreds of terabytes, petabytes, and we keep feeding it and watering it and buying more and more. Understand what it is. But once you've understood what it is, then apply protections. If that asset's protected, they can't do anything with it.
Just to expand on that, really, because I think you're moving from what people have often thought as good enough to adequate to actually fit for purpose and functional. And rather than just a bunch of point solutions, a load of products, services, approaches, programs that fit together, that generate these alerts, that the alerts are consolidated, understood as in a more sort of holistic fashion. It's not just one stream from over there, one stream from over there that have kind of like almost banal, unintelligible alerts that just don't mean anything because they're just all sort of read in isolation. You're looking at all of that in together, and I think the legislation does a good job at sort of forcing organizations into that corner. You actually need to take this much more seriously than you have been and look at it in a really strategic manner rather than just as a tactical solution to a short-term problem.
And so moving on from that, how can organizations prepare for FSMA audits or DORA audits? And how can they ensure that all the necessary documentation is available as well?
So if I can jump in on
Go
that,
ahead.
one of the questions I ask people is, what do you fear the most, an audit or a breach? So 90% say an audit.
Audit,
Yeah.
that's what I thought, yeah.
When the audit happens, you have everything there.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be an example where saying, well, all right, your backup processes are this and your recovery processes are this. Can I see the documentation around it? No, it's there. This is our backup, our recovery, and here are the instances where we have it. Having all those processes documented, it starts, and it's simple processes. Again, you build on the process, build on the complexity, and it becomes a big living document that you constantly then, so your audit is consisting of all those documents that you can just go, here, Mr. Auditor, here's our processes.
I think it's also important to work with the regulator themselves as well, before we even start down this line, to understand where the regulator is coming from and what are the top 2 or 3 things that they're looking for in the first instance, because then that will help shape your program. If there's 10 points on there and you're starting what you think is the most important, but it happens to be number 7 or 8 on the list, then forget that. Work with the regulator, get a good steer with them, work with a good services company, a good consultant who can kind of help drive that. Typically an auditor would be that person. We've seen this with PCI DSS, so quite often PCI DSS will help you navigate that. Same with Cyber Essentials as well. And that's what it's after. And I think it's a question of if you can demonstrate, right? That's the key word here. You can demonstrate that you're doing the right thing, and that'll take you a long way.
I would say demonstrating you're doing the right thing is probably easier if all the right stakeholders are collaborated, all the right
Yes.
teams are involved.
Yes.
Just because there's a BCP and an IR plan doesn't mean that they shouldn't know about each other, that kind of stuff. Lovely. Okay, so what insights can we share on training board members and making sure that they're well prepared to handle cyber attacks, cyber risks, anything along those lines?
Well, phishing simulations don't work, I can tell you that. The standard training that we use right now just doesn't work for board members. It's quite often they'll see it beneath them. That's the first issue. And second thing, it's just not relevant. They don't see the realities of it. Being able to impede a business direction that they want to go in. So let's say we want to do a new business model, come out with some new innovation, go out to cloud, do something different. And if you can show that, not having good cyber hygiene practices is going to severely impact that, then people do start to take notice, certainly when you're in a competitive play.
Absolutely. And forums where they can speak with their peers, and the peers who are sort of slightly more sort of informed or in line with a good security model, that's one of the best places. They will learn from their peers, and often their peers have learnt from trial and error, and they've been burned. And when they hear those stories face to face from people they trust, from people they see themselves on a level with, that is essential. I think that sharing of stories between like-minded people is possibly the best way to train.
Absolutely.
You need representation at the board level. So at the moment, the CISO reports into the CIO. So then the CIO is on the board. And so it's one step removed from the actual, key members of the board. So I think something like that needs to happen. Either the CISO or someone needs to be on the board that's got a direct agenda to own cyber for the organization.
At this rate, financial service organizations should have, identified and mapped out what their critical services are by now. How do we think organizations might have done this, particularly in the realm of cloud services? And, what challenges do we think came up? How do we think these challenges were overcome?
Yeah, we've got larger financial services organizations where they've got strong or their own independent legal teams who can negotiate a cloud services agreement or a service levels agreement, whatever. They're in a very strong position to do that. But for the smaller ones who don't, they need to be looking for that customization, because that one size cookie cutter contract does not fit everybody. And it is almost always in the favor of the cloud services provider.
Inevitably.
I think the thing I was going to answer was the first part of the question where you were talking about mapping their important business services, because I think that was a challenge. I don't think it's a straightforward exercise at all. And I think really it focused every organization's mind on what they knew and, more importantly, what they didn't know. And I think it raised some concerns, perhaps, that they didn't have before. Now they've had to get round that. In theory, they've had to get round it by now. Not sure if everybody has, but in theory, they've had to get round it by now. But some organizations have really taken it upon themselves to go to the next level, and they've put in place automated service mapping techniques, whereas before they didn't know the components of a service. Now they know the components of all services, and they've got an automated approach for finding them out, which is a long way ahead of where they were before. And that sort of practice, I think, is really, really valuable and one of the big outcomes of this exercise for me. And people are clearly monitoring their important business services. And that's the type of information that will go to the C-suite. And that's one part of information they will understand. So we've built dashboards for people that literally have, if you've got, let's say you've got 35 important business services, don't know how many you've got, doesn't matter. You've got literally 35 dots and they're red, amber, green. Yeah. It's something the C-level will understand. This is what I have to report back to the regulator. This is what makes my business work effectively. If any of those are red, then I've got concern or need to be worried. If they're not, everything is good. So that's how the gap can be bridged to the C-suite. And that's how they can understand the culture of resilience a bit more, which is great. It's a really good outcome.
Perfect. So let's have a quick think on to business continuity exercises in this world of operational resilience, and also compliance management. How can organizations ensure that their businesses or their business continuity plans are robust, comprehensive, ready for facing any kind of potential threats, risks, anything like that?
And I think it starts with actually invoking them and using them. I mean, organizations do it now. We've seen it with data center switches and stuff. Thing is, it's only for key services, and cyber doesn't always play into it. And actually, it's more than cyber. It's that whole kind of regime that sits around. It needs to be part of business continuity. You have to break down those silos. BC is seen as a department on its own, which is there for just giving core services. Actually, it's a lot more than that. And it goes back to what we said right at the beginning. Cyber isn't just a technology issue. It's a business-wide issue. It affects all the business processes you have, your business applications, the services that you provide. And so it has to be an integral part of your business continuity program. And it starts from there. Whether you're mandated to do, biannual testing or, annual testing, whatever it is, it has to be enacted. And I would say what doesn't happen either is the actual testing of the cyber aspects. So we can assume that we've had disruption, but it doesn't say what kind of disruption. Was it kind of a natural disruption, or was it a man-made destruction whereby it could be a cyber attack? And how do you recover? And it's really putting all of that into a consolidated framework, and kind of how do you segment and test that? I haven't got any answers on how you do it in reality, but certainly that it needs to start from there, and it's around getting various heads of department in a room and mapping it out. Yeah, all the stakeholders need to be involved. You can't just have one team enacting it and saying we've done it. It has to be from top down.
And then it's a parallel. What happens is that as the CEO gets informed, that the CTO, the CISO, that, and it filters down, the people then at some point the employees need to say, don't turn up to work tomorrow because there will be no office, or there will be, but there's no continuity to connect into, so you will have to work from home, and here's the process.
I think COVID led to a lot of people understanding a bit more on that, didn't they?
Yeah.
Didn't it? So all of a sudden everyone's working from home, and we've got firewalls that don't seem to work, and or people have got to get access to that data, but it's never been they've never been able to access it from outside before. How can we do that securely? It was a huge paradigm shift, I think, from security, from a security and just a business operational perspective. So I think, that was, people have had a lesson.
And there are two terms that people use interchangeably. So there's a business continuity plan and there's disaster recovery. So there's a whole
the optimist
thing.
and the pessimist.
So recovery point objectives, recovery time, what point in time can I recover back to? So financially, we work in a transactional nature and it's down to milliseconds. Can I restore back to that millisecond? No. I have to have a parallel infrastructure that is mapping that. So if this point A fails, point B is there and is up to date, is current, there's no lag. It's been, and that has been tested. The business runs on critical infrastructure, and that infrastructure has to be analyzed, understood, and that plays a role in your continuity plan. So all the essential elements of those components and say, these are the bits that I know. I need to have phones, I need to have networks, I need to have switches, I need to have servers. What are the bits that I need to have to make us up and run? And do I have that in data center B? Have I got that in a recovery office that I can go to, that I can move staff to, and I can run because the service is already replicated in the cloud, and I can just operate from there. So I can say to a core team, saying assemble there, because we'll run the operations center from there and we'll coordinate the disaster from there. So that's some of the things that you do.
This might be a rogue question, but let's say, a critical service has been disrupted from a cyber threat.
Yeah.
Do you grab the incident response plan first or the BCP?
Both.
Both.
Yeah.
It's IR. Typically be IR first, because the rest of the business might not be impacted in that same way. You might see just one tier one service go down. Your immediate reaction is to, incidents happen. You don't know whether it's a cyber incident at that point or not, but you've got to then follow the plan through to see actually what's the root cause, how do we contain it, how do you remediate, and how do we get minimal service back on again. If you go back to operational resiliency, what we were talking about, and put it in a cyber context, well, there's no way you can protect yourself from all the threats. The threat landscape is evolving at such a rate, there is absolutely no way you can keep up. So the question then is what are the core minimum services can you still provide whilst under attack or some kind of disruption? And it's getting that model right and the balance right for that.
That's a big balancing act.
Yeah, so, DORA, the core fundamental principle of DORA is operational resilience. So your business continuity plan, your disaster recovery plan, they're all components, significant components of that, because if you're not operationally resistant, there's a problem.
Yep. Moving it outside of financial, but I remember a story from the military once. I wasn't in the military, but talking to people where you've got two divisions. One division needs food, another division needs tires, and they get hacked. The people that need food get the tires. The people that need the tires get the food. Operationally, they're
screwed.
Yep, they're screwed. And motivationally, they're screwed. And the brand of the Ministry of Defence, that's diminished. People have losing faith. What's going on? These cowboys don't know what they're doing. So, that's internal brand. But, a big event like that can have a massive impact on your external brand too.
Well, absolutely. Brand protection is so important when it comes to everything that we're discussing here. I mean, like, how does this come into play in you guys, in your experience?
Yeah, so reputational damage,
Yeah.
Absolutely. The lack of trust in a system
Yeah.
can lead to that run on the bank that we've seen in the past happen, and shakes the foundations of the whole economical system the financial system that we depend on for everything.
Well, absolutely. Because even like I care about, the brand of the company that I work for. I want us to be a good company.
Mm.
But at the same time, I couldn't imagine working in the financial services industry when all this, DORA legislations are coming out, and that's people's livelihood that you're dealing with, that kind of thing. It's a big task to be that brand, let alone keep its reputation good.
And I think also you can't just look at the financial services industry, because reputation is based on experiences, some of which are in financial services, some of which are outside of financial services. So the comparisons have to be with, I guess, banks are perceived now to, at least in most people's eyes, to be a technology providers.
Mhm.
So you have to be delivering the same level of service as the other technology providers that they consume. So your Skies and your Apples and people like that. And that's put the benchmark even higher. So when things do go wrong, they absolutely do get noticed.
Yes.
And it does drive behaviour change. It didn't used to. People never used to change their banks. It was, you were more likely to get divorced and change your partner than you were to leave your bank.
Yeah.
It's not the case anymore. And you've got secondary accounts coming into play. Most people have at least one bank account. And switching direct debits from one to the other is now really straightforward.
Yes.
Mhm.
So actually, the challenge for the established financial services organisations, it is more than it ever has been in the past, and there's much more to lose.
But I was also going to say, even I'm old enough to remember a time when I had to go to an ATM to check my bank balance.
Yeah,
Whereas nowadays, that's crazy. So
yeah,
it moves quick. Like, it's easy to forget just what is covered in this scope across the EU under DORA. Like, there are so many players. Is it like 22,000 organizations are
Yes.
impacted by DORA?
Yes.
Yeah, like that's so many individual people who are, having to strive to ensure that this entire industry stays good,
And- The European Banking Authority are aware that there are banks and financial institutions that are going to fail. And that they're worrying about it, because they said, we've put it in place and we know there's organizations that are still just.
and this is, of course, this is one piece of regulation as well, and it's by no means the only one.
No.
So the
not the
pressure
last
that's
one.
on financial services organisations is absolutely immense from a compliance perspective, and it's not stopping. So it's almost like cabs off a rank. So you can see them coming at you. It's just a question of being able to manage them and deal with them. And that pressure impacts an organisation's ability to respond to DORA. So we were talking about operational resilience maturity as if, oh yeah, of course that's something that everybody's going to do. It might not be.
No.
It might not be. So they're balancing risk management at the highest levels of the organisation with that sort of outcome in mind.
It's not the core of their business.
No.
But they need it, but it's not the core.
They do.
One final thing I want to add about it as well is there's a danger that it's become the next thing, where people, everything you get emails about DORA, and the financial institutions must be bombarded that they have to filter out noise. So now it's trying to make yourself heard over that noise and saying, wait a minute, we're giving some pragmatic advice.
Like
Protect
making a
the-
podcast.
Yeah. Protect that core asset.
I feel like there are lots of different ways to come at it, and a lot of different perspectives to bear in mind. Because you rightfully said, like, I go straight to just thinking of banks. There's a few organizations might be impacted by DORA, a few banks, but there are so many different kind of people who might be like the
Yep.
ESAs and all that kind of stuff. So
Yep. And again, going back to that third-party supply chain,
Yeah.
the
huge.
expansion of the regulation is huge as a
Blast
result
radius,
of that.
yeah.
So one of the things I say is, if in any way you're dealing with businesses that are in the EU, you are impacted by DORA. You're a third-party supplier. You automatically get included in that, and you will be part of that audit chain.
Absolutely. And I love bringing in experience from Ireland. Right.
I do think that third party supplier question is the big one long term though, because the guidance we've got so far from the PRA is that there's going to be a small number of critical third parties. But actually, if you look at the number of third parties that every financial services organisation has a relationship with, it's pretty significant. And that is clearly just the tip of the iceberg. And actually, if you think of the most likely critical third parties, and we've talked about them already, cloud service providers, actually they're pretty resilient. So that's not where the challenge is. The challenge is more likely to be with the smaller organizations where there is a relationship with lots of financial services organizations, but the relationship might be just provide one part of a important business service. And at the moment, it looks likely that they're not going to be in the first batch of critical third parties. But over time, through experience, it's likely that that number of critical third parties is likely to grow based on experiences. So this is these rules and guidelines that I think are likely to evolve over the next few years. And of course, they'll need to be harmonized with what's going on in the EU, because in parallel, critical third parties are being looked at by the supervisory authorities in the EU as well. And actually, it's the area where financial services organizations are most concerned at the moment, because what they can see is easier to manage than what they can't see.
I think that's a really important point for meeting the requirements of future legislation. As future legislation comes towards us, like the cabs off the rank, whatever, if you adhere to best practices and you keep up to date with the changing best practices, more than likely you will be compliant.
Yeah,
great
Full
shout.
stop.
Yeah, great shout.
It's so easy.
Isn't it?
Just stay compliant.
Stay compliant.
Yeah. Well,
So thanks for tuning in and listening or watching with us. And thank you guys, of course, for being here today. You've been amazing, very insightful. The Big Cyber Series is available on demand. If you want to check out any other episodes, you can go to softcat.com.